So today, we're diving deep into the RBFS Tour VM. It's a really powerful tool for anyone in the networking world, and we're going to break down what it is, what it can do for you, and maybe most importantly, what you'll actually need to get this entire network lab running right on your own laptop. This is the classic problem, right? You want to get your hands on some seriously complex, carrier-grade network software like RBFS, but, well, most of us don't have a rack of physical routers just lying around. So how do you actually try out configurations and see if it's the right tool for the job? All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about the solution, which is basically a lab in a file. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the resource requirements. We'll look inside the VM to see why it needs so much power, cover what it can and can't do, and then, of course, show you exactly how to get it. So how do you get around that big hardware problem? Well, the answer is pretty brilliant, actually. You just pack the whole lab into a single file that you can download. And that file is the RBFS Tour VM. Now let's be clear. This isn't some stripped-down demo or a trial with half the features missing. Nope. It's a completely self-contained virtual environment that gives you a genuine, hands-on experience with the entire RBFS feature set, all running locally on your machine. So what's in the box? Well, you get a full-blown lab experience without ever touching a piece of physical hardware. You've got total access to the command line, so you can test out configurations, play with every single feature, and even run automation scripts. And the best part? It's super accessible because it runs on popular open-source hypervisors like VirtualBox and Proxmox. Of course, cramming all of that power into a single file, it's got to come with a catch, right? And it does. This is a seriously powerful tool, but it needs a pretty powerful machine to run it. And understanding why it needs these resources is really the key here. First things first, the CPU. You're going to need a machine with at least 8 cores that you can dedicate to the VM. Then there's memory. You have to be ready to give it a minimum of 16 gigabytes of RAM. And finally, storage. The VM itself takes up about 20 gigs of space, and trust me, you'll definitely want that to be on an SSD for things to run smoothly. Okay, 8 cores, 16 gigs of RAM, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a lot for just one VM. So what's going on? Why does it need so much horsepower? What's actually happening under the hood? And here it is, the big reveal. The reason it needs so much power is because you're not just running a single router OS. You're running an entire pre-configured network topology. It's a whole lab with multiple nodes, all packed into that one virtual machine. Let's actually look at that. When you run this setup script, it doesn't just launch one thing. It spins up 5 separate containers inside the VM. You get 4 full-featured router instances, R1, R2, R3, and R4. And you also get a service node. So the second it finishes booting, you've got a complete interconnected network ready for you to experiment with. And this quote right here, it just pulls it all together. The logic is so simple and clean. They recommend dedicating 1 CPU core for every container that's running. So you've got 5 active nodes, plus you need a little overhead for the host OS and everything else, and suddenly that 8-core minimum makes total sense. It's not just some random number, it's baked right into the architecture. So, you've set aside the resources, you've got this 5-node lab up and running. What's the payoff? What can you actually do with this thing? And, just as important, what are the things you can't do? This really lays out the whole purpose of the VM perfectly. On one hand, it's designed for a complete hands-on experience with the software's logic. You get the full command line, you can build any routing setup you can dream up, and you can even test your automation scripts. But on the other hand, there are things you can't do, specifically things that depend on specialized hardware chips like high-QoS for traffic management or carrier-grade NAT. The key takeaway here is that the VM is for testing features, not for benchmarking hardware performance. All right, so you get the requirements, you get what it can do. Now for the fun part. How do you actually get this VM running on your own machine? The whole process is actually pretty straightforward. First step, you fill out the request form online. Just make sure you use a business email address. That request goes over to a product line manager to get verified. Once you get the green light, you'll get a special dynamically generated link to download either the VirtualBox or Proxmox image. And here are just a few little details you'll want to keep in mind. That download link is temporary. It's only good for 7 days, so make sure you grab the file pretty quick. Once you have it, the VM will work for a full 7 days without you needing any kind of license. And getting that whole 5-node lab going is a breeze. You just run a simple command, it kicks off an Ansible script, and about 5 minutes later, your lab is all set up and ready to go. So here's the bottom line. The RBFS Tour VM gives you a complete multi-node lab environment. The trade-off is a pretty significant, but totally understandable set of system requirements. It puts an incredible amount of power right at your fingertips, no physical hardware needed. Which really only leaves one question. Once you have a full network lab on your laptop, what are you going to explore first?